good evening, and good streaming. I am Jello Biafra, and this is Renegade Roundtable. Once upon a time, in one of my many trips to used record stores, where I rarely go looking for anything specific, I just find what I find. I've always been a big fan of magic accidents over the years, dating clear back to, when I found traded tape and records in high school and just grabbed all kinds of weird things out of the 50-cent bin of many different kinds of music that were life-changing. Well, one fine day, I'm flipping through some punk rock or other 7-inches, and I find an interesting-looking one with interesting-looking black, white, purple, orange, Halloween-y art called Mayhem on the High Seas by a band called Tsunami Bomb. Oh, well, this is kind of cool. I wonder what this is. I'll take it home. Then I put it on, and wow, this is not your average little crusty punk thing at all, is it? This is more gothy, maybe psyche, women singing and playing in the band. This is something else. This is really good. Oh my God, they're local. They're from up in Sonoma County. Maybe they need a label. But then I find out within a week or two, I guess they don't need a label. They are headlining Slims in a couple weeks. So never got to see the band back then. But then fast forward a few more years, and who winds up? Yes, now it's time for the incest department, the nepotism department, working first as a publicist and then after a stint at a sports website, coming back to do a very fine, outstanding job as general manager, web designer, who did one hell of a job getting us a much more kick-ass website and a much more kick-ass customer base as a result of it, knowing how to get people to get things, so to speak. And then, lo and behold, back comes Tsunami Bomb, as well as another new band of his called Loud Graves, as well as his Monster Candy podcast about horror and Monster Legion clothing design, which I didn't hear about till earlier today. Here we are. Welcome to the one and only Dominic Davi.
Thanks for having me. That was a great introduction.
Of course. Would I do you wrong? Would I do anybody wrong? I am the gold standard of introductions. Well, maybe, at least today. Anyway, okay, let's go even further back than Mayhem on the High Seas. What created you?
Well, my parents luckily came to a decent agreement, and apparently I was a happy accident. So that helped get me started. No, I started out hanging around when I was a kid. Like, I was born around Petaluma, but we moved to the East Bay for a number of years. And then around when I was about in 6th grade, my parents took me back up there. And they saw the Phoenix Theater in Petaluma, which is a very old opera house theater vaudeville theater that's been there for hundreds of years. And they saw a bunch of kids hanging out in front, and they're like, hey, there's kids there. And then literally kicked me out of the car and drove away. And so I had to come hang out at this place, which was run by a guy by the name of Tom Gaffey, who still runs it to this day. And he was providing an open space for the kids of the town to not only like skateboard inside the theater and hang out and play video games, but also the stage. You could put on a play, you could start a band, you could practice there, you could learn how to play there, you could try things out, and
even skate on ramps inside the theater.
For many years, there was no skate park in the town, so all the skaters would skate there. Now there's a skate park, but they still skate there. But they, thanks to him and the Phoenix Theater, I was introduced to the concept of local bands, which I had no idea that you could do that. And after
we all go through that at some point, and a lot of times we have punk to thank, even if it's a different kind of music we eventually pursue. So how old were you when this revelation happened?
I was right about, I'd say 13, 14.
Okay.
When I got introduced to all of this stuff. 12, 13, and then 14, I was able, as I got older, my parents would let me be there more often at night, and then I was able to see whatever shows were happening there. And that's how I got introduced.
What was your favorite music before you discovered local music and underground bands?
I really liked old, my father was really into blues, so I was really interested but I liked the more folky backwoods blues that he would listen to. I found more interesting. And then my mother was a super surfer girl, so I was really introduced to Jan and Dean and Beach Boys and just like Dick Dale and like all those sounds. And they both listened to a lot of rock and roll. My father was a guitar player, and he always tried to get all of us to play music, but it didn't work for the longest time. But in the end, it worked out because literally all my siblings play instruments now. But as kids, we were a disappointment at first because we were not interested and didn't take until I saw all these shows happening, and I decided that I wanted to play myself. I wanted to be on stage and try it. I want to do my own version of band. And I'll never forget how happy he was when I came home and I was like, I think I want to play music. And he's like, finally. Finally.
I didn't know you had stage parents. My God.
Yeah, well, they were always really supportive. I wouldn't go so far as stage parents, but my dad always played. There was always music around, but then they both were in, they both go to shows a lot. So they were always really supportive, though I think my father was far more supportive than my mom at the concept of me like doing bands. But then we didn't. When I talked to my friends and we're like, okay, we're going to do a band. And like my best friend played drums and I was like, okay, you play drums. And then we knew a bunch of guitarists, but nobody knew a bass player. So I was like, initially I was going to manage the band like some sort of 17-year-old Svengali that I envisioned myself. But then I was like, okay, we don't have a bass player. I'll be the bass player. I'll learn bass. So my father, I think, traded a bunch of weed and some guitar parts to get a 1971 Fender Telecaster bass for me from some guy who ran
such a thing as a Telecaster bass.
It's the most enormous bass in the world, and it's got a thick neck. It's like baby shit brown, but I loved it. It was heavy. It's totally inappropriate for punk rock because it has this deep, beautiful tone, but it's like you start playing it fast and it starts sounding like bathtub farts. It's just too much for it.
Yeah.
But it's what I had. And so I started learning and I formed a ska punk band before I had ever heard of a ska punk band. Like I thought I was being super original because I like ska and I love punk. And I was like, what if we did a band where it's ska for verses and then it gets like heavy for the chorus? Wouldn't that be cool? And then everyone was like, yeah. And then somebody was like, that's awesome. Have you ever heard of Operation Ivy? And I was like, who? No. And they had apparently just broken up. But I thought I was this genius coming up with this completely new idea that was already done. But we started, and I within 3 months of me picking up the bass, I started a band, and we got this.
That's a very punk rock way to go about it.
Yeah, I was terrible. Everyone was terrible, but it was actually a really good band. We found this 14-year-old girl, Vanessa, who was singing at a coffee house that we were at, and she was amazing, so I asked her to sing in our band. I mean, keep in mind, I was 18, I think the guitarist was 16, the other drummer was 18, and then we had a 15-year-old singer by the time we started playing shows. And then we actually got to the point where we were headlining our own shows. Like we built up a pretty big following, and then it exploded. But it was a really good test run. Looking back, I now realize it was a dry run for Tsunami Bomb.
So this wasn't Tsunami Bomb itself?
No. I actually did a number of really terrible bands before I found my way to Tsunami Bomb. But yeah, that's how I got started doing music, and how I found my way into all of this was I just wanted to take part. I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to be more than just than an audience member. I felt like I could do more. So
you're very, very fortunate then to have come along when you did, because when I came along, there was no participation of youth doing their own bands at all. And in my parents' household, they were classical people with a little bit of Pete Seeger and whatnot. You either play piano or you play folk songs, or you don't play anything in this house. At one point I wanted to try drums. No. And talk about electric guitar. Well, here's a book of folk songs. And that, as they say, was that. And then until punk really took off, the very idea of younger people starting their own bands, which of course many did in the 60s, and some of those bands are still together today. But it was just unheard of then. So, and punk, of course, blew that back open again for everybody, not just with music, but you could do your own media too, fanzines and beyond. And it changed everything, and not just for punk or new wave, as they called it, but that just rippled and rippled and rippled and rippled to the point where now anybody, can, if they really want to start playing or do a band, they can, if they really have that desire, they can do it at any time and not worry about whether they're quote unquote good or not. Just do it, because eventually you either get good or you've just got something so wild and whack straight out of the gate that, it's going to take off from there. Or you're going to make some really weird EP that is even harder to get a hold of than Mayhem on the High Seas. There was 15-year-old kids going completely nuts who put out 100 copies in their little Midwestern town. Nobody ever knew about it again. Mm-hmm. So, but there were places to play. You met more and more people, of course, at the Phoenix Theater, which to me, the Phoenix Theater, it's a big old hollowed out theater that in one way looks just completely trashed and destroyed inside. On the other hand, it also means it's punk proof and experiment proof, and they can do all kinds of different things in there and run by people who are open to all kinds of different participation. It's sort of like a much larger version of Gilman Street in the way it looks and the whole thing, but it's, it's more cosmopolitan, and you can do things big and small, and I tip my hat to them.
Yeah, it really was defined it very much is a North Bay, for those listening, the northern part of the Bay Area versus the East Bay. I was definitely part of the North Bay tribe of bands and kids.
Right.
Because the Phoenix Theater very much was a good answer to Gilman Street, except the difference was, whereas Gilman had like a group that ran it, we had a benevolent dictator in the sense of Tom Gaffey, who was just incredibly kind and encouraging and open to it and patient with all these kids. The town initially was not so friendly with the Phoenix Theater, but then as generations grew up and took over the town, he eventually was given the key to the city, or the equivalent in Petaluma, and now it's a nonprofit with a lot of support from local businesses, and it's much more of a friendlier environment because he's just helped so many kids, and then to provide a stage like that. So that's what's created Tsunami Bomb. And I didn't know how fortunate we were until in Tsunami Bomb I started touring and playing other places, and I realized how rare that was. So we were really lucky, because when Tsunami Bomb started, by that time I was trying to start a band that I'd been really frustrated with some of my bands that I had done already. I felt like it didn't quite pull off. The initial idea was to do something that was like a complete comic book. I was really into manga and anime and Japanese comics and stuff, as well as superhero comic books. So our initial idea is that Tsunami Bomb was going to be this, we all were going to have superhero names, and then we were going to present like a crazy show, sometimes with masks, and we wanted to do something that was going to be way wilder than we were punching for the moon, and then we just never got to that
sound
point.
Like Guar.
Almost, honestly, the initial ideas is a much more nerdier Guar, but we never got there. Like at the same time, we just got it. It was just such an effort to get people to play with us. Like there was a core group of Oubliette and myself, and we were trying to just get everybody beg, borrow, and steal members. So it was like quickly the idea. Is
a woman who plays keyboards to this day.
Yes. So I started. So Courtney and I met at the Phoenix Theater. She was actually my younger brother's age. And I think I actually, not to bust her, but I think one of the times I met her, I caught them making out at the Phoenix Theater. Like they were a lot younger than me, but they were like only about 5 years younger than me. But like it was in all ages that hung out there. So it's like, but I was always really impressed with her. And I knew that she was a musician and was in, her parents had taught her piano, and then she was like picking up guitar. And I remember she was the first person I asked to do it because I was like, you know what? Even to this day, you meet her, you do not forget her. She is amazing. And there was just something about this kid, you know? So it's like, and I liked her. She had a lot of attitude. She was, you know, she just didn't care. So I went and I was like, you want to do a band? And she was like, okay. And I was like, all right, so you'll be the guitarist. And she's like, oh, no, I suck at guitar. I'm going to play keyboard. And I'm like, what? So I want to play keyboard. And I was like, I don't know what to do with the keyboard. I've never been in a band with a keyboard. I don't know what to do with that. And she's like, well, tough. That's what I'm playing. And if you want to play with me, and then I'm playing a keyboard. And I'm like, okay. Do you want to sing? And she's like, no, I want to play keyboard. I mean, I'll sing backups, but no. And I'm like, okay. All right, then we have a keyboard.
So you didn't really have a sound planned out ahead of time or a desired sound, or did you? But then the keyboard threw a wrench in it, and ultimately maybe you smelled it was going to make you more unique.
Yeah, that didn't occur to me till later. Like, I mean, I knew to say, like, okay, one of the things about the scene that I came from in the North Bay is that it felt like at that time, every band was trying way harder to be as unique as possible. I don't always, this isn't a read on people, but I don't always see that in bands, that desire to like, how do I take everything I love and make it like I'm unlike anybody else? I have to stand out. And
I mean, another North Bay band who's very fond of the Phoenix and maybe draws bigger crowds than anywhere else, of course, is Victim's Family. And that was part of their agreement when they first decided, Ralph and Larry first decided to play together, is, okay, we love the energy of hardcore, but you do not want to be a hardcore band. Energy, yes, but sound, we can do better. We can do more.
Yeah, they were definitely an inspiration at that time for us. One of the many, because it was like during that time, a lot of the funk and jazz sounds had found their way into a lot of bands that were playing locally, and it was really interesting. But I mean, I wasn't a funk player. I wasn't experienced enough for that. But I knew that I liked darker, fun music, and I wanted to really grab people. And a lot of the stuff that was able to carry over with Tsunami Bomb was the idea that we wanted to be the band that we would love. Like, what kind of band would we fall in love with? And then what would we make? What would we do? And that's dictated everything. That was the plan. And then the sound just kind of evolved between Courtney and myself writing. And then as the members came, it worked out. What ended up happening, our first release is called B-Movie Queens, and it's a split with a band called Plinky. And Plinky was one of my roommate and one of my best friend's younger sister's band. And they were playing, and we started playing shows with them. And Emily was the bassist and singer. And one holiday break, our singer, June from Tsunami Bomb, informed us that she was transferring to Portland. And then they found out their guitarist was transferring out so they were all Sonoma State students. So all of a sudden our bands had these openings, and we had begged and borrowed guitar players. We never had a guitarist. So their drummer became our guitarist, and their bassist singer became our standing singer and would sing with Oubliette. And that's how the first real version of Tsunami Bomb came together. We absorbed a band that we were trying to do a split with. By the time the split came out, the singer, Emily, she sings on the Plinky side, and then she sings on the Tsunami Bomb side, because by the time we were able to record, she was in the band. So, and Plinky was done. So we merged. Yeah, so we merged two bands, and then we managed to finally pick up. We had a different drummer at first, but then we were able to pick up Gabe, who was just a fantastic drummer. He was like a metronome even back then, and he was in this industrial punkish band that was good, but didn't quite. It was great actually, but didn't quite get there. And he joined us, and he's been in the band ever since. That's when it really came together. We had been together for about a year or so by the time that happened. But then, and it was funny. I gotta say this. It was funny because at the time we got a lot of crap from everybody for changing a singer and for changing members. So that's been a thing that Tsunami Bomb has had to deal with a couple times, and I've had to witness it a few times. So, I understand, but it was like, we had to win people over back then, just like we had to do a couple years ago now. And
so What was the name of the drummers' industrial band?
They were called Brazil.
Oh, okay,
then, yeah, it was a local.
Not somebody I'd heard of then.
No, it was a local band, but it was really good. It never left Petaluma. It was a completely home Sonoma County band.
So how often did you even play outside of Sonoma County?
We started, at first we started playing locally, and that was our goal. We played a lot. And I remember running into Kepi Gooley from the Groovy Ghoulies. We got to open for them one time. And I remember asking him, I was like, how do I become you? Like, how do I go from here and then I'm on Lookout? Because actually that was one of the things, that was another plan that we kind of had, is that we were like, I want to be a Lookout band. So I was like, how do I get there? And he was like, okay, well, first off, you got to play outside of here and you got to go places and play and build a crowd. But it's like, if you see a label that you really like, you need to play with the bands on that label and they will tell the label about you. And if you're awesome and you keep doing it, like, and you do well, then that label will pick you up and you can go from there. And that was like the best advice ever at that time, because I had no idea, how I would ever capture the attention of Lookout or Alternative Tentacles or Fat or any. I was like, I don't even know how to get on your radar. Like, I'm just out here in Petaluma. I got a crowd of people
tried with us, but
well,
we weren't Lookout. What can I say?
Well, it was initially like,
that was the label to be on at that time.
Well, it was really funny that you said, when you said, like, you were like, oh, I wonder if they needed a label. Tsunami Bomb has always had a very hard time for finding a home. It has never been easy. We didn't have a label for a very long time. We toured behind 2 7-inches, like the Me Movie Queen split we put out, and then eventually Hunter from AFI was coming to our shows, the bass player, Hunter Bergen, and he started a label called Checkmate Records. And he came to us and he was like, I'd like to put out your 7-inch on Checkmate Records. And we're like, yes, that would be great. So that's how Mayhem on the High Seas came about. So starting out, we didn't have a CD, we didn't have cassettes. We had 2 7-inches that I had to beg people to buy for $3 each, and we toured behind that. But after that conversation, that's about the time we started getting out there, started playing shows, and people started discovering us. And AFI was one of the early bands to kind of find us through Hunter and kind of take us under a wing. And that was a huge, putting out that 7-inch really put us out there. People started, like, who loved AFI, who were from Ukiah, just a few miles north of us, discovered Tsunami Bomb, and that was our first big, like, introduction to anyone. So touring around California and Arizona, we would tour. Our first tours were like down south, and then as I joked, and then east. So Arizona, New Mexico, we started like hitting those places, and that's.
But did you even play in San Francisco or not?
We tried, but not often. Like, San Francisco was a tough nut to crack back then. Like, so we tried to play around San Francisco to the point where we would have enough of a draw when we finally got into San Francisco. And then we did eventually. You know, Tsunami Bomb's always been one of those bands that everybody who loves it thinks that we're a big secret and they're the only ones that love us. And, like, always seem surprised that there are, like, other people who are into it. So then we'll play a show, and then I remember people being shocked how many people we were bringing, because it was like, we've been doing this for, like, we've been begging people to get into our band. So it took a while.
Yeah, I mean, you were headlining Slims when I saw that, so it blew my mind when we talked about this later, that of all bands with that kind of an audience, that kind of a following, you never played at Gilman Street.
We played Gilman. Literally, you can count on one hand the amount of time, like less. I think
you told me you never did.
No, we did twice, but it was far later than you would expect. Like, we were already touring a lot by then. The shows were great, but like Gilman did not get behind us. Like, we had a really hard time breaking into certain places, and Gilman has always been, to this day, very like, unimpressed with us. So, but I mean, it just was never, it never got to be a place that we went a lot. We wanted to, but they didn't really want us. We got on in roundabout ways. We get on like their weird, like, all right, we put together a Halloween show with a bunch of bands that have been trying to play here, and you guys can do that. And then it would go really well, but then we wouldn't get invited back, or I'd hit them up, and then like, oh yeah, we'll find something, and then nothing. Yeah, Gilman was not really, never really opened the doors for us a lot, like, which was odd in retrospect, because like a lot of people, you know, I've talked to people who work and volunteer at Gilman, and they're like, oh, you guys got to come back here. And I was like, I'd love to. And then nothing ever happens whenever we ask.
And by then, somehow you were making albums and stuff, and you'd vaulted up onto that bracket and then playing overseas, or was that a little later?
That was a little later. So what happened is we started touring behind these 2 7-inches over and over again, and which is crazy to me that we did that, because that was at a time when 7-inches were not popular. That was all about CDs, but we couldn't afford a CD. We had 7-inches. So we had become really close friends from the beginning. The first shows we'd ever have was this band out of Sacramento called Lucky Strike. And they were very good, very pop punk rock band, and they taught us a lot about touring. They brought us on some of our first trips anywhere. They were on a label called Tomato Head Records, and Tomato Head Records was the drummer from Skankin' Pickle. When Skankin' Pickle was going, they had a label called Dill. And then when Dill ended, the 2 partners that ran Dill, the drummer and the singer, split off and formed 2 different labels of their own with some of the assets they had. And that was Tomato Head Records and Asian Man Records. Tomato Head was looking for new bands to bring into the fold, and they found us through Tsunami Bomb, and they agreed to put out an EP for us on a CD, and that was called The Invasion from Within. So that gave us a CD to tour behind, and then it gave us more excuse to tour with Lucky Strike and some of the bands associated with that. And it kind of helped. It was another person from a larger band that was known, that was into us and willing to help us out. And so after that, we toured a lot just on our own, going back and forth. Nobody was interested after that. Like Tomato Head was kind of struggling and ended up through a bunch of other things kind of not being in a position to do anything more with us, and they ended up kind of ending soon after. But we did well on there, but no one was interested. We submit stuff, and it felt like everybody said no. I felt like we were too poppy for Alternative Tentacles. I would have loved to have been on Alternative Tentacles, but like we had sent stuff to Epitaph, and they told us at the time that they didn't sign girl bands, which was totally what they said. They would deny that now.
Very interesting. Now that I think of their roster, that may still apply.
Yeah, when I asked, I was like, well, what about the Distillers, who they had just signed at the time? And they were like, that's Tim's girl. And I was like, that's Hellcat. And I was like, okay, can I talk to him? And they're like, no. And I was like, okay. And then we sent our stuff to Fat, or we had played shows with the Ataris, actually. And Christopher Rowe, the singer of the Ataris, he and all the members and his wife at the time and all of their girlfriends at the time, they all really loved us, which was really cool. And he would call me up and he's like, okay, call this number and talk to them. This is Fat Records. Tell them I sent you, and you got to talk to them. And I was like, okay. So I called Fat Records, and they put me on, and they answered, and I was like, hi, my name is Dominic Davi from Tsunami Bomb, and Christopher Rowe from the Ataris told me to call. And they're like, hold on. And I'm sitting there listening to hold music, and then Mark Tamo, not to call him out because he's a really nice guy, but the GM at the time gets on the phone, and he goes, hey, yeah, we're not interested. We don't like your name. And I was like, our name? And they're like, yeah, man, it's just we're not into it. And I was like, and I swear to God, I said, this is exactly what I said. I was like, you put out an album from a band called Dog Piss. And he was like, yeah, I know. And I was like, but you don't like our name? And he's like, no. And I'm like, okay.
What was the problem with it?
I don't know. They never really explained it. They said they were sweet enough to say later that they really regret that. But I think somebody, I don't know if it was Mike or Aaron or him or someone else, just didn't like the name Tsunami Bomb, and that was it. And Side One Dummy, we submitted.
I learned later just how uptight and, shall we say, unpunk some of those labels devolved into. Oh, this is too harsh. Oh, this is too this. This is too that. I mean, part of the reason that we had Leftover Crack for a while was whatever other reasons caused the falling out with Hellcat. One of the things that planted the seeds was the Leftover Crack album they did put out was supposed to be called Shoot the Kids at School. Too negative.
Oh my God, yeah. Oh.
And yet you put out a band called Leftover Crack. Okay, well, whatever. It's a great name. That's what interested me in them initially. And then the one we did initially was called Fuck World Trade. Yeah. And it was, their own take on 911 and the dark side of so-called free trade, which turned into NAFTA and the WTO and this, that, and the other. The cover is the burning towers with gas pumps on it and stuff. Very volatile at the time, but apparently the part that Hellcat and, what was Anti-Flag's label? Just AF? Wasn't that the name of Anti-Flag's label? AF. They wouldn't touch it either because it was too negative. And Anti-Flag's supposed to be a political clashoid, band that gives a shit, right? But we can't have that. But apparently another reason was they didn't like the word fuck in the title because they were afraid all these chain stores wouldn't touch it because it had that naughty word in the title and everything. So, it's funny how we had no problem with Shoot the Kids at School or Fuck World Trade. I mean, look who's running the label, who's put out the Crucifix, Too Drunk to Fuck, Brujeria, Blowfly at the time, and more. We were fine with that.
Yeah, I didn't have any connection to AT. I didn't know how I would ever get your guys' attention. And I was suddenly realizing, like, nobody wants us. Like, no one wants us. We've always been we're a much weirder duck of a band than I thought we were, but like I feel like people have a hard time fitting us into anything. And I remember somebody who took an interest early on too was Kevin Lyman, actually from Warped Tour, and he pushed us to Side One Dummy. And I remember that Side One Dummy didn't want us. They told us, no, but we're going to hook you up and see if we get a finder's fee of some sort by pushing you to a major. And it was like, I was like, that's not...
Oh, good God.
Okay, I'm not trying to do that. Like, we are a punk band, and we might be a weird punk band, but we are a punk band, and we would like to be a part of the punk rock scene. I'm just trying to find a home. And I was like, getting to the point where I was like, okay, we're just going to do this ourselves. But that's when we started playing. The Ataris hooked us up with the Vandals, who put us on some shows. And they've told me that what happened is like Christopher Rowe was like really talking us up. They put us on some shows. They were blown away by how much people we brought and then how much merch we were selling, because the thought of the day, this is the early 2000s, is that, it sucks to say this, but this is how people thought. Girl bands don't sell merch. So they saw us play and they were like, oh my God, they sell as much as No Doubt, who was the great exception to that. And they couldn't believe how much we were selling. And so Kung Fu Records offered us a record deal. And that's how we ended up on Kung Fu Records, because the Vandals played like a string of shows just as a favor to Christopher Rowe, and that's how we put out the records.
Well, to interject with a word to the wise, even if it sounds antiquated in this day and age, about how to approach labels where you don't know anybody or anything. I mean, even to this day, Alternative Tentacles still gets a fair number of demo packets from unknown bands, an unusually high number from Italy to this day, all things considered. That's true. When was the last time we were able to put out an Italian band? We tried for Cheetah Chrome Motherfuckers twice and weren't able to do it at the end of the day. But now what we get, well, a lot of people email the label, look at our Bandcamp, we want you to listen to us. Completely oblivious to the fact that nobody at the label, least of all me or you, has time to sit in front of a screen and go through people's band camps as a passive person and everything. I mean, the reason I demand hard copies is most of the demo listening is done in my car. That's my radio is Demo Gong Show. cassette or CD, it's Demo Gong Show. You know, of course, in the minute I hear anything that sounds like the Eagles with loud guitars and whiny, stupid boy-girl lyrics, in other words, pop punk, out of the stereo it goes. What? But since some bands start with 2 pop punk songs, so they think that's what everybody, what even I would want to hear, and then suddenly it gets good if I give it enough of a chance and stuff. But more to the point, well, in the case of Tsunami Bomb, if you'd sent me that Mayhem on the High C 7-inch, I would have been all over you, at least to the point of writing you myself, and then when is your next show? Where is your next show? And sniff it out from there. But this is just me. I mean, of the getting on AT, in large part, you know, you got to be really good live. You got to be kind of musically unique and fiery, and hopefully a little bit demented at the same time. Although that isn't totally across the board, but that can certainly help. And the other part of the equation, of course, is do we even have any money right now? The only reason we picked up No Means No was finally they sent us a really good recording that captured the live band in the form of the Sex Mad album. And yes, there was money to put them out, so we jumped on it immediately. And the rest is fulfilling history and all. But also, another thing, if people are sending stuff by snail mail, then especially if you know somebody's a vinyl junkie and you have vinyl, of course send that, and or whatever. But the more you showcase something unique, the better. I mean, not everybody can send a video and be guar, you know, so I don't usually, you know, bother with the videos at all, and except on rare occasions. Something that clues you in, you know, the way it's approached, you know, maybe the lyrics, something. I don't need like 30 pages of press cuttings on how much you love the earth and are wasting trees at the same time. You know, we don't really need that. Just keep it short, keep it sweet. But in this day and age, for crying out loud, in the digital age of Bandcamp, if you're sending a hard copy to somebody like me, especially, and I can't get back to everybody, I'm sorry, there's no time. I try, but it just, you know, it's way out of my hands at this point.
That'd be all you do.
I try. But at the same time, you wouldn't believe how many people sending in CDRs or sometimes even vinyl as well as cassettes, there is no return address on the packet and no email address. Sometimes no cover letter, anything at all. Just here's a CD with nothing.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, one of those is really cool. I'd like to, you know, if we're even in the British Midlands, maybe we could get them on a Guantanamo School of Medicine bill or something, and can help this band out because they sound really good, but they don't provide any contact info at all. Oh, well, maybe you should just Google online and look from there. But that's how much time and patience is there in the day for things like that. You know, lay it all out. And then it's easier, and you never know what could happen. So
yeah, I feel definitely strongly that like some of the advice that Kepi Ghoulie gave me all those years ago is very accurate. Like if there's a band that's making noise, playing with our acts or anyone on the label, I'm gonna find out about it. And honestly, I would add to it.
That's a really good point that I haven't thought much about. Although back when things were going well with them, Neurosis pushed me to see Dead and Gone. We pick up Dead and Gone, and then they're really pushing 400 Blows, who we almost worked with eventually, and the Phantom Limb.
Right.
And I was just stunned when I saw the Phantom Limbs and how unique they were. Gilbert and Sullivan, keyboard-driven punk with a really good front man, even ended with a Screamers song, although they didn't sound like the Screamers per se. But I wondered if they knew them. Oh, they do. And then I talked to them, and no label had ever approached them. And considering you know the caliber of that band and eventually what a cult they had and everything,
right?
I couldn't believe that. So jumped in, and there we were. And then I mean, was it them or maybe it was Michelle working at AT, the publicist at the time, who first pushed the Fleshies? And they were on the same bill at Gilman as the Phantom Limbs, and we wound up with 2 bands in one night out of that. First and only time that ever happened, but you know, even if the records were good, whatever, seeing live is where you really know what's going on. Every once in a while, I even get so intoxicated after seeing a band live, I offer the label to them before maybe I should. That hooked us up with MIA and Grady, and I think, well, ultimately the legendary Shack Shakers too, although they'd been around the block on some other labels first before they came to us.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I think that definitely, yes, your live show, you play with our bands, we're gonna notice that. I definitely would also say I'm even more cagier, I think, about stuff than you. Whereas I tell them, like, if Alternative Tentacles gets a demo from you and I listen to it and I look and I see you have zero, like, you don't have followers, there doesn't seem to be any play, I can't tell, like, doesn't look like, it looks like you're just playing local shows. There's nothing wrong with any of that, but don't run before you walk. I gotta see something. You got to show me something. Something's got to be brought to the table. Like, my advice to bands that are looking to get on a label, looking to get on Alternative Tentacles, I would 100% say play and build an audience, build your show,
and
build
don't
your act,
wait
be
for
original.
us or any other label. If need be, just put it out yourself.
Go get behind your
Another one of our fellow Tentacles, Kevin Risden, was tied with a band called, wasn't it Glowing Brain? Not Growing Brain, Glowing Brain. And of the ones he handed me, we should look at these. That was the one that jumped out as being really, really cool. And eventually, as Kevin put it, they got tired of waiting for us and put the album out themselves. Bravo. Good. I had no idea they were even waiting for us. And I don't know, I guess nobody approached them about stocking them in mail order, at least, if they even have any left. And they've come up here once, but it was during COVID, and I didn't go to any shows at that point, so I've never seen them. But that was one that struck me.
Yeah, we stock them now, but I mean, at the same time, but yeah, that's it. Like, go, don't wait, keep going, keep building, because you're only looking more interesting.
There's some Dance With Me TSOL in there. There's some Victims Family in there. There's some, maybe even some Unsane in there. They've got something, basically.
Yeah, and you got to have something, because it's like, how am I, which one of my jobs is to convince Kansas to buy your records, to convince a state that you're not in, the record stores, to take an interest in your band, in our release, and put it in their store. And if you're not going there, or you're not putting content out, you're not building anything, or, for example, you don't have a big audience in your state, in your place, so that helps balance the fact that nobody in Kansas cares about you at all. Like, I need your help. I need you to help me help you. And the more you do, the better. So it's like 100% play. And then as you play, try to get shows with the label acts that you like, because if they like you, we're going to hear about it. We're paying attention to who they're playing with. And if the Darts or legendary Shack Shakers or Arnoldcore or, Spindrift, any of them come to me and go, you got to check these guys out. I'm going to check these guys out. We're going to look. And so the more you do, and then the more you create for yourself, the more you offer to people who have to use whatever you've created and sell you everywhere else.
Yeah.
It's
the antithesis to that, unfortunately, I knew well who the band was. We got offered Melt Banana way back. And I thought we didn't have the money because there was a new Alice Donut and a new Tribe 8 that was supposed to come out right around then. And that was where all the money went. And both those came in way late. And we could have added Melt Banana. And then instead just went to Revolver and did their own label that's manufactured, distributed by Revolver. And that's where they've been ever since. And they are, and they are a bigger band now than then, as well as who knows when they're going to stop getting more and more and more intense as time goes on. That was a great dropped ball in a way, but I didn't think we had the money. So what could we do?
There is that impact on is so much of a thing that people don't realize of how much the funds dictate a lot. And, AT has so many obligations to the bands that we have, as well as keeping our catalog in press and keeping it out there.
Attempting to keep our catalog in print, because Ludacris played a reunion show last night, and it was the best show I ever saw them play. And I was like, oh my God, is it our fault they didn't get as big as Neurosis? That they were that good. And but then I thought, oh my God, if they really try to relaunch the band, which unfortunately was not the plan and is not the plan, we were out of stock on vinyl and CD on Ludacris completely.
We are.
Just like what happened when Cross Stitched Eyes came over here the last time, and the more and more people buy the mail order stuff, or at least they were during COVID. But then we kept running out of more and more things and had no hope of making any more, not just because of money, but because it takes so long to get anything made now. And of course, on top of it, our main pressing plant, Rainbow, quit business. And you thankfully went down there and got some of the friends from LA Machina, who we only managed to do 1 7-inch before that band blew up, and got our stuff out of Rainbow. But that means, yes, we got all these mothers, plates, stampers, what have you, to make more discs. But every single one, we have to test press them first to make sure the thing is still usable and wasn't damaged. Because some of them came from a previous plant that went under, Alberti, and then moved over to Rainbow, and we hadn't made any of them since. We thought the Biafra DOA Last Scream of the Mystic Neighbors thing was gone, and we had to rebuild it from scratch. And then there's the pieces in the envelope with something else, and Jesse never knew it was there. And so then we got a test pressing, and now I hope we're finally making them again, because that's been gone for a long time. But when do we actually get them? And here we are doing biz talk on other people's time, namely the listeners. But this is what's going on with all kinds of labels, even bigger one. I mean, all of a sudden, oh God, what's his name? Was it Harry Styles or one of the other ones? Ed Sheeran. Suddenly he couldn't get his vinyl made for the big new album because Adele had all the plants booked. So Adele took all his ability to make his.
I remember when Adele took over everything
too.
Yeah, she blocked off a lot, and it is the way it is. It's hard because now we drop so much money in advance, and then we have to wait 4 to 6 months to get the record, and then it takes time to get to everybody. So it's a tremendous investment in a product that we don't see a return to for well over a year.
Oh, I know. It used to be that you would get credit and you would pay later once the stuff was sold. Now you got to pay for all of it in advance, or they won't make anything for you anymore, which is messing us up extremely and slowing things down even further. We are doing the best we can. Hopefully not GoFundMe, but we may have to try and get more stuff made quicker. I mean, don't forget, listeners out there, Renegade Roundtable, the money is not going to me, assuming eventually makes some. It's going to Alternative Tentacles to finally even maybe get Ludacris or the Mentally Ill or Los Olvidados and Drunk Engines, which is further along in the schedule, get those back out and stuff too. People want them. They just can't have them right now, which is finally people want to buy all this stuff of ours, but they can't because it isn't there. So on that cheerful note, back we go to Kung Fu Record. How many releases or full-length albums did you even have out by then, or did it start with Kung Fu?
Started with Kung Fu. That was our first debut record, and that was my first taste of actually the idea of making a big LP that was going to really get out there, because all of the distribution up to that point had been incredibly limited. This was the first okay, here we are. And then around that time we had really started doing Warped tours, and so we were really I think this probably would have been around the time that you found the Mayhem on the High Seas. I think when you say headlining Slims, I think that started around that time.
Does this mean that you had more than one album's worth of material learned and could record, and you had to pick and choose and figure out what to put on the Kung Fu album, or did you just make more songs and fill it up?
We built up a bunch of songs, and most of those songs made it to the album. That generally was seen. That is the biggest album that we put out initially, and that it was the right time. The Ultimate Escape, which came up with that title is based off the fact of wanting to die after being on tour for so long. So the guitarist at the time, Mike, said I just want to die, and I was like, well, that would be the ultimate escape from this tour, and that's the title.
I warned people on AT or not that If you haven't done a lot of touring, for crying out loud, take it a little bit at a time and do longer and longer ones, because you're going to find out real quick how well you really get along with other people in your band. Not be one of these people who finally all goes camping in the woods together, and then when they get home, they never talk to each other again and stuff. So
we were touring
it's something you kind of have to learn how to deal with and manage, and find your own space somehow if and when needed, so it doesn't, there's not more quarreling going on and things like that. It's a brutal experiment.
Yeah, we toured ourselves into the ground, 100%. By the time we got to the full length, Oubliette had left the band, and that was a bummer. I regret letting her go, not working it out. Like, she just wanted to move to San Diego, and the idea of her moving elsewhere was just absolutely not okay with everybody. By the time we had management, and like everyone was tired, everyone was cranky, everybody was starting to not get along. Her leaving was the beginning of the end, even though we put out our biggest album right after that. She is all over that album, even if she's not on there. Her writing is very much a part of it. Right. It's just the guitars took on some of the keyboard elements. We couldn't find a keyboard player to replace her, so we didn't. The unfortunate part of that was that the band became a little bit more typical without her, and I feel like we lost a lot, and at the time I didn't even realize how much. Plus I had lost one of my best friends, and it was just ugly. And then after that it just got worse, and by the time they did their second album, The Definitive Act, they had actually kicked me out of the band. So well, as much as they could have, I still owned the band, because I still had control over the name and the and I didn't sign off anything. I was like, no, get bent. I'm going to stay in it. But like, I got convinced to let them keep going. And then they put out another album, and that album did well. I think it was called The Definitive Act. And I feel like that album was their attempt to be very much in the moment of the scene that was happening at that time. And I think there are good songs on it, but it just, I think that after that, it finally toured itself into the ground and fell apart. And that was that for Tsunami Bomb for a long time. And I didn't.
There was only 2 albums before that little one with the white cover that was a mishmash that you gave me later came out.
Yeah. So fast forward to 2015. 2015, Kung Fu Records, I had started working with to do publicity and social media for, and I was just sort of helping out. I was doing graphic design because they had lost their hard drive with a lot of their old art, so I was rebuilding some of the art of the old records. They came to me and they were like, your Tsunami Bomb still sells. Like, we still sell a surprisingly amount of Tsunami Bomb. And it's like, they were like, we would love to put out like all that old stuff. We put it out as a collection. And so around that time, I had actually happened to start talking to Oubliette about doing a new project. And we had approached Gabe, our old drummer, about doing a new project. I just wanted to play with them again. And I didn't even know how serious. We were all scattered in different cities, but I was like, who cares? Let's do a project. Let's do something together. I think people would there's a few people who'd get a kick out of it being, people will know it's Tsunami Bomb people, but like, let's just do it. Who cares how it does? And then around this time, we have Kung Fu going, hey, we'll put out this record. So I talked to them, and then we reached out to some of the other members that we weren't getting along with as much, but even they all agreed it would be nice to have out. So we put together that white album that was called Trust No One, which is like the early years collection. But at the time it was being worked on, it was we weren't going to be together. We were just putting together like, okay, here's this collection of the old stuff, the 2 7-inches, the 6-song EP, and then a couple extra things to throw in of how all the early day stuff came out about before then. I had argued to try and make it 2 EP 12 inches, but Kung Fu was like, no, you get one. Right. Put it all together.
I noticed with the later stuff, as you say, it was much more homogenous. And a lot of the elements that I loved about Mayhem on the High Seas weren't really there so much anymore, and it was much more, dare I say, standard pop punk.
Oubliette Sparks. It was Courtney, the keyboard player, Oubliette. Like that's that. Once we lost her, and then I no longer had that person to write with, the fundamental sound we were trying for we started losing. And but I mean, it was still a very good band. It was a very tight band. It toured the songs. There were some really good songs on all the release, even the one I'm not on.
Do you get a cut from the ones you're not on?
No, I don't. I don't collect it.
Right.
I make sure it goes to the members that deserve it. To be honest, I wish it went to certain members, but there are members who have refused royalties, and I wish they wouldn't. I wish they'd take it. But yeah, I had to straighten all that out and try and get the right people paid what they deserve. Tsunami Bomb's always split stuff equally. So every time it's like Tsunami Bomb here's the members, and then all those members get 20% or 25% if it's 4 of us. That hasn't worked as well as I had liked in terms of certain members like kind of got hosed with certain things like that. Like for instance, though Oubliette contributed heavily to the Ultimate Escape, once she wasn't in the band, she didn't get a cut of it for a long time, and that really bothered me.
That's what they call publishing royalties. Not everybody splits apart anymore.
Yeah,
thus, there's a lot of stuff with the later Dead Kennedy deals after it was yanked away, where I'm not seeing the writer's stuff as far as I know. We get back to, okay, so there's the Trust No One one, but then at some point, not long after, wasn't that when Kung Fu wasn't Kung Fu anymore? And Joey Escalante sold the whole thing, including theoretically his own Vandals albums, to Cleopatra.
Yes. However, by that time, during the time as we assembled this record, right before that, like that's when we thought, it would be fun is if we got together and actually played a show or two to support this this release. Like otherwise, it's just going to come out, and people may not know. Kung Fu's not going to sink a ton of marketing dollars into it. But like we could get it out there if we played a show with them or played a show with the Vandals or something. And then all of a sudden, my great idea of putting together a new project with the old members of Tsunami Bomb suddenly became them wanting to do Tsunami Bomb. And unfortunately, not everybody wanted to come back, and not everyone wanted to do it. So we had to find somebody. I tried to get Courtney to just do the vocals, and she was like, fuck that, I'm not doing that. So again, every time I try to get her to be a front person, she just tells me no. We ended up finding Emily did not want to come back, and we had to respect that, and she was just not interested. So we ended up finding Kate Jacoby to take over vocals, and it was only supposed to be for a little while. We're only going to do a couple shows to just celebrate this music, and then everyone said they were going to do the new project with me that I wanted to do. And then as it happened, all of our old friends were like, hey, this is Tsunami Bomb. I mean, it sounds like Tsunami Bomb. So all of a sudden everybody was like, I just want to do this. And I'm like, but we could do a new thing. But then around that time, as we were just starting to open up, and I came around because we started doing shows, and I started seeing that like bands now, nobody sounded like us. Nobody was doing what we were doing. Nobody was trying to do what we were doing. And it felt like we still had a place in things, and the reaction of people kind of got us to, we do a show, and so great, people ask us to do more. So we started playing, and all of a sudden we're playing shows all the time. And around this time, Kung Fu Records got sold to Cleopatra Records, and we were folded in. And I think at first we were very much not one of the acts or records that they were excited about. Like it wasn't us. It was more definitely about the Blink-182 record and the Vandals and the Ataris. I almost wonder if they would have just because they were releasing records to certain artists. I almost wonder if they would have released ours, but then Rolling Stone came out with a top 50 pop punk albums of all time. And we were like 37 with the Ultimate Escape. And then that was it. And then they were like, oh, we're repressing this. And then they repressed they ended up repressing all of the records. So now Cleopatra / Kung Fu now puts out all of ours.
Did they respect the art and everything, or did they repackage?
No, they definitely respected the art as best they could. They haven't repackaged anything. They're very kind to us. They are, but they're not very communicative. So I don't always know that they're reissuing something until it's out. Like we find out with everybody else. So I wish they would give us a heads up, because it's like we would promote it. Like we would tell people there's a new edition of something coming out, but like we find out when everybody else finds out. So that's the only annoyance. But otherwise, I've talked to them. We've had a great relationship. I know they are sitting on more stuff, and they're going to want to put it out. We've done a couple compilations with them. We put some songs on comps, and we've been very happy with how it's worked out. So I don't have anything negative to say about Cleopatra in my experience. They've been good, except for that they don't tell us when they put out stuff, and that's kind of annoying. They are committed to putting out all the early stuff, and I know that they're going to probably put out, like, I know they're sitting on a live record from us, from a DVD we did, so I fully expect to see that at some point. So, I mean, you know, so people who love my band, the early versions of Tsunami Bomb, there is a label that is putting it all out.
Right.
So.
Meanwhile, the Kate version with Oubliette continues.
Yeah. So Kate and Oubliette suddenly become our front people. We're suddenly finding ourselves doing Tsunami Bomb, and I'm like, how did I get here? But it's going well. I mean, there are a lot of people who are a little weirded out that we had to change singers, but it's one of those things where I'm like, guys, she didn't want to do it. And I don't know what to tell you. She didn't want to play with us. She didn't want to come back. She didn't want to do it. She has her own thing. Go listen to that. Check it out. Support her. That's it. We're doing this over here. Because we're doing this over here, now they're reissuing all of our old records so you can hear the old stuff. I know it's not the same. I know it's not what you necessarily remember, but you'd be surprised how much more it sounds like the old days than you'd think. But overall, it's like, but at this point now, ironically, now, today, we've been together. This is the longest running version of Tsunami Bomb.
Wow.
Kate has been the singer of Tsunami Bomb as long as Emily had been the singer.
Right. And she, considering how little she'd ever done it before, when you guys headlined the first night at Tentacle Fest, she handled it like a pro.
She came.
Voice, magnetism, everything else. And I didn't see anybody complaining that it wasn't your earlier singer at all. No. Maybe some of them didn't know. I have no idea if they even look remotely alike. But you know, to my pleasant surprise, you know, no Cleopatra for the newest album. It wound up on Alternative Tentacles instead. You would know what was going on with it at all times that way, wearing two hats, of course. Very convenient. So
I was really surprised you were willing to put it out. I didn't think AT would be interested, especially working here and seeing what we were looking for. I'll never forget, because I was submitting it to labels, and you were like, what do you mean you're submitting stuff to labels? Why haven't you sent me anything? And I was like, I don't think you'd like it. I know you don't like pop punky stuff. And you're like, I put out Pansy Division. You're poppier than Pansy Division? Like, just send me the stuff. I'll let you know. And then when you listened to it, you were like, I like it. What do you think? I actually liked it. And I was like, good.
It was pop punk, but it's got to have something a little extra, which, of course, Leftover Crack really did when we had them. And Evaporators are arguably a pop punk band more than a garage band, even though there's Nardwuar playing the organ, including on top of people in the crowd, and the Farfisa comes with him and stuff. You know, that gives things a very distinct personality. I mean, they were also on Mint in Canada, who's, you know, a successful label and very, very good at what they do, to the point where they were selling more of theirs down here than we were being able to sell the American copies. So we decided just to, you know, let Mint have Nardwuar and the videos and Evaporators for the world again and stuff, and off they've gone, but we're still buddies, of course. And so before we finish with Tsunami Bomb, I did notice at Tentacle Fest that overall the set, as I told you, it was more fiery and punky and heavy by Tsunami Bomb standards than the album we did. So we don't know what's coming next. I mean, we pick up World Inferno Friendship Society finally, and they handed us a really mellow cabaret album. And then the next one, which unfortunately turned out to be the last one because we lost Jack Terrycloth, of course, Miss you terribly, my brother. But it was a little more like earlier Tsunami Bomb and World Inferno, and swung more, and just it was okay. This is kind of more what we were thinking of in the first place, and this is a band that has so many brains in it. They're going to go wherever they want to go to recording to recording, and so the stuff you've played me of next Tsunami Bomb was way more in the fiery direction, and I dig it. I think I've told you that. More of this, please. Although I also, considering the pop polish and the skills and Oubliette's talents and the voice and everything else, I told you afterwards at the Tentacle Fest, okay, I'm laying down the gauntlet. Make me your own parallel line. The greatest of all the Blondie albums, the only one I really like that much and stuff, and it's all over the place, and I think the songwriting or skill is there to, if it ain't parallel lines, it's going to be Tsunami Bomb's thing. But you've got the talent, you've got the experience, you got the chops. The more you reach for the sky, the happier all of you and all your followers are going to be. So I look forward to it when it eventually gets finished.
Challenge accepted. One of the things, thank you. I'm very proud of our Alternative Tentacles record.
You should be.
It's called The Spine That Binds. But I do think that we were very much in our own heads, and we kind of got in our own way a little bit. And one of the reasons is that we felt that since we had changed, this was the big album that came out, that we were changing like there's a new voice. We believed in Kate and we loved her, and I've seen her just grow, and she's such an incredible performer now. It's just amazing. But we thought, okay, so we tried to keep in mind that the last thing everybody heard was the definitive act, and we wanted to keep the flow as best we could and bring it back to bring an album that would take what Definitive Act was and bring it back to what Invasion from Within was, and then still at the same time introduce Kate and get us back on what we feel our track is. So we tried very hard to write something that brought in all the elements of Tsunami Bomb as people knew them to that point. And part of me now sits here and goes like, I feel like if one of our bands came to us and just said that to me, I'd be like, what are you doing? Just write a great album. Stop thinking too hard. But at the time, like, it's different when it's you and you're in your own head and you're just thinking about, you're trying to win back old fans, make new ones, bring the band back together and move it forward. I do feel that The Spine That Binds does that really well. We expected that record to have a tough reception, and in the long run, I felt like people would hear these great songs and hear them live and understand like, oh, these are great songs. I love this record. As it was, it ended up getting the best reviews of any Tsunami Bomb record that Tsunami Bomb has ever received. So it's our most critically acclaimed record.
Didn't know
that. But I feel like if I'm being honest, I also feel like we were so careful, we didn't quite catch the fire in the bottle, the lightning in the bottle that Tsunami Bomb has, and that you can see live. So, like, you hear those songs on the recording, I feel like they are really well recorded, they're really good, and then you see them live and you're like, oh, okay, now I get it. And I think you experienced that where you're like, okay, because you told me once, it's like, it's odd that this record reminds me the most of the record you're not on. And I thought that was funny. Also, like, I guess that was the intention, but now I would say the way we're writing now is very much no apologies, no more expectations. We're writing the best record that we can. The goal, as I guess always it is, but the goal is like, we want every song which is why it's taking so long, every song to be, you could make a set out of these songs. This album could be a set, complete, start, finish by itself there. And I'm really happy.
In my case, in my case, just to be real quick, when we did Fresh Fruit, we had a lot of what became In God We Trust and Plastic Surgery Disasters as well. But a lot of bands who finally got to make an album would put out whatever the new stuff was and drop all their earlier stuff. And I decided to take a gamble. Guys, let's make this one the first batch of songs for the most part and get it all in order. And then we can do the other ones later. And consequently, and I'm very proud of this, scoping some of the things out, In God We Trust was kind of a spontaneous thing inspired by the explosion out of Washington, D.C. with, Teen Idol's SOA and then Minor Threat and all that. We wanted to make a really wild back to hardcore thing, which In God We Trust also has bigger problem now and Riot and Rawhide on it too. So what do you know? But the idea that everything, okay, but then plastic surgery can be expanding on the Holiday in Cambodia side of the sound, but In God We Trust doesn't. So when some people really didn't like In God We Trust Incorporated, we got a petition from Scotland to save the dead Kennedys and stuff. And I was like, well, maybe you'll like the next one, which then the In God We Trust people and people like Jeff Bale and Tim at MRR who liked that really didn't like Plastic Surgery Disasters. Too bad.
Really?
But in the long run, I'm very, very proud in a way that no two of my music albums have ever sounded alike.
Yeah.
Not even the Lard albums do. None of it does. And there's two very distinct ones I did with the Melvins, and all the GSM ones are different, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where the pressure lies. And ultimately, when I worry about it and get all insecure, ultimately it just happens anyway at the end of the day. And of course, one thing also to kind of change to another major subject at this point is, of course, there was more momentum going on maybe a year ago or more or less on new Tsunami Bomb music, but then there was a bit of a derailment.
Yes.
Known as, out of the blue, you, of all people, and what's your age now?
I'm 46.
46, age 45 or 46, you suffered a major stroke.
Yeah. It came out of nowhere. It's so surreal how much that has affected me, and I'm really grateful to be as cognitively myself as I am, and to have recovered as well. I definitely still feel issues from it, especially when I get tired. But it's, even in this interview, I've had to pick quickly. Thankfully, it's happening quicker now, but I have to pick an alternative word than what I would have said because I can't get the word out. So I've gotten to the point where I'm definitely, I think, where people aren't noticing, but it's so much more effort the best way I can describe it is it's so much more effort for me to communicate and be me than it used to be. And I understand how Fetterman, for example, would be saying things when he was debating Dr. Oz.
Right, John Fetterman, who was a Democratic candidate and an outstanding one and a real character, too, for senator in Pennsylvania. A very important thing to keep Mitch McConnell from becoming even more of a dictator than he already is, wagging the dog and beheading it as well. And didn't he have his stroke after you had yours?
He did.
And then, of course, Dr. Oz and the Republican Nazis were saying, oh, look at this guy. He could never be a senator now. He's half retarded now. Look what happened to your grandma right before they died. It happened to him. He can't be a senator now. And they were getting all over him for stopping a little bit here and there at those debates. And I saw those. They were showing them over and over and over again. And, man, I barely would have noticed it at all unless I was really looking for it. And even then, it sure didn't sound like a disaster or a derailment to me. His poll numbers went down, but he won anyway, perhaps because the witch doctor didn't even live in Pennsylvania and he was a Trump puppet and stuff. Enough people knew enough about Dr. Oz not to believe his doctor's advice about John Fetterman. So I take it you're confident that he's going to be much, much more competent and on the ball and able to do his job as a critically important senator who may wind up higher than the Senate in the long run.
Yes,
you
I do.
think he'll be able to pull it off?
Yes, I completely do, because inside it's all there. But what happens when you're tired is that it's just everything that starts coming back. You start struggling to find the words. You start stumbling. You can get a little confused, but it's not detrimental. It just exists. And of course he's tired. He's been campaigning. He's preparing for the debate. Then he debates. He's not on that's not him at 100%. It takes very little rest to just get yourself back. I'm still experiencing that. We've been playing shows and it's getting better, but still there are times after shows, performances that I still struggle. And it just, and other times,
plus
it's
you're
just
a guy who has all kinds of things you want to do at any given time, and you're good at so many of them. You have Jesse Townley or Jello Biafra syndrome of trying to do too many things at once, and that helps. It helps drain you. But do you think having not one but two bands and still being a graphic designer, a comic book artist, and whatnot is helping bring the full Dominic back because you're doing so much?
Yes, I definitely I realized that when I was when I was in the hospital bed afterwards, it really I realized just how close I came to dying and to worse, not being completely there. And the taste I got of what it was like to listen to people talk to me and not quite understand them, and then not be able to smoothly communicate backwards was very profound. I knew that there was never a moment where I thought that I wasn't going to do everything I could to bring myself back. And I have pushed the boundaries all the way along, testing how far I could push myself. And then when I can't go any further, I definitely rest. There's times I've hit walls many times, and there's times that people around me have been very worried about how hard I'm pushing. But even they recognize that what I've been doing, and even still all this time later, I'm still doing it, is pushing it as far as I can so that I can expand and get back as much as I can. Like for a while, it was hard to read, and I would sit down with a book and I'd read paragraphs over and over again until I got them, and then moved on to the next one. And now I can read again. And I'm still working on my writing. I'm struggling to, I was writing a book and that came to an abrupt stop, because it's still hard for me to put sentences together in a way that makes sense. But I'm getting better, and it's just like doing it over and over again.
Is the book is it fiction? Is it a graphic novel, or is it something else?
It's fiction. I'm also working on a graphic novel as well. But of a particular possible horror project that we both know about. But the book is something I've been working on for a long time, but it all became very challenging. I still run into issues with numbers, sometimes switching them. Now it's a lot of small little things that definitely test one's patience. Like you doubt everything you're doing, and you have to check it like 100 times, because you will literally see things wrong. I'll interpret things wrong a lot more than I ever did before. But that said, even if I'm like this for the rest of my life, I'll take it over what could have been the alternative. But it definitely hurt me. I definitely,
as I suggested, the more you say you're going to tell people you're going to do stuff and whatnot, write everything down. Especially when you're going to get another text a minute later and another call from somebody else, and zig and zag and zig and zag. And, I don't handle that very well all the time either, including neglecting to write things down. I still haven't gotten back to Chris about the reworked art for Will the Fetus Be Aborted, the single I did with Mojo Nixon that's on the album, which after Alito and Clarence Peeping Thomas and their handiwork is a more relevant song to have everywhere. I mean, Annie Kid Wolf already made a video for it, and stuff that's up and
That's
around.
cool.
So that song needs to be everywhere. The parody of Will the Circle Be Unbroken that Daryl Cherney and Judy Berry put together and stuff, and I covered them. But meanwhile, the most beneficial thing we can do here, of course, it's going through a lot of listeners' heads right now, I suspect, is, oh my God, this could happen to me at any time. Even kids get strokes sometimes. So the fact that it can happen to anybody, including maybe even especially me with the heart weirdness for trying to keep from causing strokes and stuff, it's mild, but you gotta be on it and stuff. Anyway, and you know about it too, because I think you just had a heart procedure as well, but because of the stroke. But anyway, and so did Nardwar after his second one, same procedure. But anyway, how do you know or detect if you think you might be having a stroke? I have no idea, or had no idea before I talked to you. So this is where we need the crash course.
Well, it's funny because I didn't know either.
Of course.
Thankfully, my girlfriend, Valerie Ott, knew what was happening and was able to figure it out in time. But I mean, mine was also very obvious.
But what did you first feel? What did you first feel internally or in your head? You were at the beach or something. Were you at Stinson Beach?
It was a very stressful time for us. Like, Valerie was working on classwork. It was a particularly hard class for her. And then I was having a particularly tough time with AT. There was a lot of demands on, and we're spread very thin. Finances were spread very thin. And I was just like, you know what? Let's take a break. Let's go to the beach. We went to this place called Stinson Beach, which is in Northern California, just about 45 minutes north of San Francisco.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people know where it is. Yeah. Highway right before the turnoff for Bolinas.
Right. And it's really a great beach. It's probably the most Southern California feeling beach in the Northern California area, or one of them. And so we just, it takes us 45 minutes to get out there. So we just head out there. We were going to have lunch. We're going to sit on the water. It was just starting to get warm enough to be out there on the beach. The water was still cold. It's always pretty cold. But it was a really great day. We just needed a moment to breathe, and we got some deli sandwiches. And then we walked up to go to the water. And I remember that her and I are standing there, and she's finding out just how cold Northern California waters can be in April. And then we saw a crab shell, like a molted crab, like it molted and shed its extra shell, and it's rolling in the water. And I was like, oh my God, this is a whole crab shell, like an entire impression of a crab that is no longer there. It's just there, the outer shell that it molted. And I pointed, and I was about to say, oh, hey, look at that. And I got out, and then all of a sudden, no pain, but I couldn't say anything. All I could say was like, and it was the most.
And your eyesight was okay.
Everything was fine at first. I was like, and I kept like trying to say the word crab shell, and I just, and I couldn't get anything out. Meanwhile, she kind of saw with my gesture, so she's like, oh wow, and she like looked at it and like took a picture of it, I think. And then turned to me and she's like, what's wrong? And I was like, I kept holding up my finger. I was like, 1 second, because it felt like if I could just take a breath, I could obviously talk, but then I'd take the breath and I couldn't say anything. And I think she asked me at the time, it's like, are you having a stroke? I didn't know what a stroke, I didn't know what it felt like. And I shook my head, and she says that's kind of funny that she asked me what it was, because why would I know? But she said that at this point I was drooling, because I think I was already starting to experience the paralyzation of my right side. So getting the face droop.
Oh my. I
kept like...
Did it feel cold? Did the paralyzed part start to feel cold?
No, I didn't notice that. I just noticed that I was so focused on like, talk. And I was like, it was unlike any feeling I have ever had, because it doesn't make sense to not be able to speak. And it felt like almost like, I even had the thought of like, well, it's almost like one of those horror movies. Like you just can't, well, he's like, somebody says, no more talking. And you're just like, or their mouth is gone. So like, she was like, hey, let's go sit down. So she brought me back to where our towels were, and we had a beach tent, and like, I'm sitting there and I put my shirt back on and I'm like, and she's like, you got to talk to me or I have to do something here. And I grabbed my phone and I was going to text her and I went to unlock my phone and it didn't recognize my face, which now I realize it was because it was drooping so much. And then I started typing my code in and I couldn't remember it. It was gone. Like I just had no memory of my passcode. And I just looked at it and I dropped it. I just set it down and I looked at her and I went, and she's like, that's it. And so she called 911 and gestured to another camper to go get help, another beach, somebody on another towel to run and get lifeguards. And they came in and they came in really fast and they started talking to her. And she's like, I think he's having a stroke. And they tried to get me to talk. I couldn't. They tried to get me to follow their finger with my eyes. And I did notice my head had to like turn. I was having trouble focusing on it. And I was like, okay. And in my head, I'm like, no pain, but I'm just like, this is really weird. I don't know why I can't talk. So they told me to like raise my arms. And then that moment I raised both arms, but all of a sudden my right arm felt sluggish and I had to fight to get it up. And I was like, whoa, what's that? And they're like, okay. So they put me on a gurney. They're like, I think you're having a stroke. And I was like, okay. And it was just sort of panicky. Like it felt all like a whirlwind where there were all these lifeguards and they were talking and they got called ahead and she had called 911. And I guess a bunch of people got all of our stuff together and helped her get her stuff together. And they put me on a little like pickup sand go-kart pickup. Right. You know, I was on the back of something and they drove me down to where these firemen EMTs were and near the firehouse on the section of beach that's cordoned off. And they started trying to talk to me and a nurse came up and I heard a helicopter show up and they had decided to take me to Mills Peninsula and Burlingame in the South Bay because they had the best stroke ward, they felt. And the next thing I know, Valerie's telling me like, you know, goodbye and that she's crying and it broke my heart, but she was like, I just wanted you to know I love you, you know, I love you and just know that. And I realized later she never told me it was going to be okay. And I talked to her later and it's because she wasn't sure she was going to see me again. Oh. So I got put on a helicopter and this whole time I'm not in pain and everyone's telling me you're going to be okay. And I'm like, I'm going to be okay. I believe it. I don't know what's happening. Valerie had to drive, I feel terrible. She had to drive like all the way down to Burlingame on her own, not sure what was going on. But while I was in the helicopter, they're putting on the IV. It's kind of like an ambulance. And I'm just sitting there. One, I'm like, wow, I'm on a helicopter. This is crazy. And the other part, I'm like, man, there's no way I'm getting out of this without getting stuck with a whole lot of needles. That's also what I thought. I was like, I'm going to turn into a pincushion for this. There's no way out of it. Right. But I thought, okay, seriously, focus. You can talk. You got to talk. And I was like, just say your name. And I was like, okay. It took so much effort and I was able to finally say, my name is Dominic. I was like, but the helicopter's really loud. Nobody can hear me. It's just me. I have headphones on. I'm like, my name is Dominic. And then I was like, good. Okay. Now say your last name. And I was like, I don't remember my last name. I was like, okay, that's bad. And I remember in the helicopter going, okay, that's bad. It felt like certain parts of my brain were just shutting down and like I couldn't access certain things and I couldn't remember certain things. All of a sudden it was all fuzzy. It felt...
Did you try to work your extremities to make sure they were still there or not?
Yeah, I did. I kept trying to check stuff and my hand was like, I just kept moving it and I was like, come on, come back. And I was like, okay, I don't remember my name, but if I just say it, I've said it my whole life. If I just say it, I'll get it right. So just say it. And whatever you say, it's going to be right. And I was like, my name is Dominic Davi. And I was like, Davi, there it is. Got it. Okay, I know that's my name. And I was just like, okay, that's definitely not good. So that was my first, like, okay, I know the not speaking thing is weird, but that's got to be something weird. I don't know what's happening there. But then when I couldn't remember my name, I was like, okay, there's some problems. They brought me to the, we landed at Burlingame, and they were really on top of stuff. A doctor came up and was like, okay, Mr. Davi, we suspect you are having a stroke. We're going to take you into a CT scan. We're going to take a look, and we're going to see, and we're going to go from there, right? And I was like, I couldn't say anything. And they brought me into a CT scan, and then they brought me into the emergency room, wherever I was. And after that, and they said, okay, you have a very large
clot.
Yeah, clot. See, that's how I was struggling. You have a very large clot. We could operate, but we think that it would be best to do a clot buster drug. But we have to warn you, sir, that there's a chance that you could suffer massive cranial bleeding. And I was like, I remember being lying there going, I couldn't say anything, but I was like, okay. And they're like, so we think that this is best. And I was like, I mean, it can't get worse.
Did they tell you how far inside the brain it actually was?
It was up in my left side.
Okay.
Over here. And it was
but if they actually did they try to take it out surgically, would they have had to cut through a whole bunch of brain to get at it? Or was it right near your skull?
I think so, yes. So they felt like they could still get it with a clot buster drug.
Right. Yeah.
It was all,
given that
was
information, I would have gone for the clot buster.
Yeah, well, I mean, I couldn't really weigh in. It was really up to them. But 45 minutes from, they were fast. I was under that CT scan in 45 minutes, and it was only another 15 minutes, under an hour to get to me, start to finish. So it was really amazing, because if I'd have been on my own, I don't know what I would have done, because I would have been not able to speak to somebody. So picture in your head, you're walking down the street, or you're near a bunch of offices, if I was at AT, and then I come out and I'm looking at you going, and I can't dial, and I can't talk. I mean, it could have been so much worse than it was. So I'm so grateful for Valerie recognizing it. I ended up getting the call.
We all are. She
and the lifeguards
took action and knew to do that right away.
I think that's something that's very significant to remember, is that sometimes it's hard to accept that a disaster is happening, and recognizing how we always want to downplay. We always want to say it'll be okay. Just take a moment. We'll take a moment. But with a stroke, time's of the essence. So one thing I learned, it's super cheesy. I'm going to warn everybody right now. It's very cheesy, but they told me, be fast. That an acronym. B is for balance. Is the person are they able to keep themselves balanced? I was starting to struggle to walk. Then it's E for eyes. Is their vision blurry? That really didn't happen to me, but I guess I did have a hard time when somebody put their finger up and had me follow it with just my eyes. I was turning my head. I was trying to focus on it. Right. So that's when I noticed that. I didn't notice it right away. F, and now we're in fast. F is face, the drooling and then the sagging of my face. It wasn't super visual at first, but it was becoming clear. I don't think it looked really awful, but I think it was subtle, but it was happening. Because you lose the muscle control in your face, and you don't realize how much it's held up there until it's not holding it up.
Right.
The next one is arms. A for arms. You have the person or yourself hold both arms up, and if you're having a stroke, your right side most likely is going to start having trouble. After that, it's S for speech. Someone having a stroke will often slur or struggle, or in my case, outright not be able to speak. And then T is for time to get help. If any of those things, if enough of those things are happening, it is very likely a stroke. But I had no idea. I didn't know what was happening to me at all. But that's what I would definitely recommend. Be fast. So look at the balance.
I think what's important about that is, say if it had been me or my own girlfriend or something was going on, the first thought is, oh, well, I'll drive you home. Let's see what happens tomorrow.
And that's a mistake
that was
a lot of
not an option with you.
No, luckily she knew right away, but I could see a lot of situations where somebody's like, hey, you're okay, maybe it's sunstroke, maybe it's something else, like whatever, but like it's important to recognize when you have to call for help. And when it comes to a stroke, part of the reason that I'm able to have this interview, have this conversation, to be able to respond and interact as I am now, it's because they got to me so quickly. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been.
Somebody knew enough to call the chopper and get you down to, where was it, San Mateo or something, where that place
Burlingame. Which is about as far south of San Francisco as Stetson Beach is north of San Francisco. Yeah, so once I was there, they gave me the Clotbuster, and I remember it was really funny because I'm laying there. They didn't inject
it straight into your head, though, did they? It wasn't in the bloodstream?
No, it was right in my IV. Okay. And they did this thing where they walked up, and the nurse that was giving the injection was like, okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, why is there a countdown? In my head, I'm like, why are they counting down? Is this scanners? Is my head going to blow up? What's happening? And then they gave me the injection, and then they kind of like looked at me for a minute, and then they stepped back, and I remember going, how long before, like, just like that? And they were like, they all turned and looked at me like shocked, and they're like, how long before it takes effect? Obviously pretty quick. And I was like, hey, I can talk. And they're like, what? Like, they seemed really shocked that I was able to respond. And I remember texting, I could look at my phone and I could open it immediately, and I was able to, I texted Valerie, I just wrote her, I'm okay, even though I couldn't even quite talk yet. But like, as time went on, it got easier, and by the time she showed up, I was able to respond.
Right. But did you fear for your life at any point, or did you just have to be in the moment and try to process it?
I didn't think I was in any, it's so weird. I knew that something was wrong. And I knew that it was weird. I was not in pain, so I didn't think, I was like, I'm not hurting, so it should be okay. Like, there was no headache or anything. And I remember that this in the helicopter, when I couldn't remember my name, that was where I was like, okay, this is more serious than I think. And then when I was in the hospital after they gave me the Clotbuster, at one point the nurse gave me a cognitive test, of which the first of many, and I got it right. It's usually about, you describe a picture. They show you a picture, you have to describe it. They show you a number of items, you have to point them out and say what each of those things are. And it's literally like key, feather, chair, hammock, cactus, or car, hammock, cactus. And I got it, and and she was really happy, and just out of my eyesight, on the corner of my eye, I saw her make the sign of the cross behind me. And I was like, whoa, okay, she seems happy. And then when she took a break, what happens when you have a stroke, you get assigned a nurse because they have to watch you for 24 hours, especially if you have the Clotbuster, because you could have spontaneous cranium bleeding. So they test you every hour, or, at first every half hour, and then every hour they give you cognitive tests throughout the night. And that was a rough night because they wake you up to do it.
Right.
But the first nurse assigned to me, it was time for her break. So another nurse came in, and I was talking to them, and she was like, oh, and she was like, I think she thought that I had a mini stroke, and
not a second one. Oh, a little stroke in the hospital?
Like, you can have a mini stroke with just a partial blockage.
Right.
And because I was talking, and she was like, she was talking to me, and then she opened up my file, and then it's probably terrible that she did this. She was like, oh my God, do you realize how serious this was? You almost died. Like, this was a full stroke. And I was like, yes, and that's when I realized I would have died confused. I would have died thinking, like, what's going on? Like, I had no idea that it was that it was that serious. And like, since then I've talked to like neurologists and others who have told me, like, 10 years ago, we didn't have the techniques we have now, everything we did for you didn't exist 10 years ago. I recovered really quickly. Even now, since then, I've been really lucky. But it's been it's required a lot of patience. But luckily, like, even when I was in the hospital, they were asking, like, okay, he's an artist, he's a musician, is that going to be affected? And I remember the doctor going, oh, no, that's fine. That's a whole different part of the brain. You'll be able to play music and
you told me you could play your bass again within days of getting home.
Yeah, it was weird, though, that I could do that, but then I would struggle to talk. If there was, like, even now, I still run into problems if, like, people are talking really fast or there's a lot of people talking. It wears me out. But back then, I would get to the point where I was like, suddenly I couldn't understand what anyone was saying. And it sounded like another language.
Right.
I wasn't able to process. So what was damaged was my communication. My right side still feels different. It feels like it's weaker, but I took a lot of physical therapy tests, and it's just as strong as my left side. It's just that it's now there's a new pathway that controls my right side.
Right.
I struggle with words. The more tired I get, the more I struggle with things. If I still make mistakes. I make a lot more mistakes than I used to make in terms of, like, numbers or reading comprehension or writing. Grammar's worse. And then if I push too far, I get confused. And I could get really confused where I don't see or notice things around me, and I'm not sure what's going on.
That's the time to speak up to the rest of the room or the person you're talking to, especially if it's me off on a tangent, and slow down. I'm having a moment. Start over. Stop.
Yeah, it's been getting better, but it's definitely an interesting experience to go through. And so now it's basically, generally I'm okay, but I notice that when I get tired, I get real tired really fast.
Right.
And then I start, for lack of a better term, falling apart. But I've been really lucky because I've been able to play shows with Loud Graves and Tsunami Bomb. I've been able to draw. I'm able to work. It's a little tricky. Some things are a little harder than others, but it's definitely been an experience in patience and in acceptance of a new reality. Like, I feel like, I think I told you once, I feel like I've gone from being able to juggle a lot of things to basically toss one ball up in the air and catch it. And I can do one thing at a time. And I try to be efficient, and I try to have a lot of, as many checks and balances for myself. But I'm very grateful for how much I've come back as it is. I mean,
we all are, obviously. And I think I'm speaking for everybody out there too.
Well, I appreciate it. It really was amazing just how supportive everybody was and how kind everybody was. But it's definitely been an experience. So I would say, really pay attention to everyone out there. If you see something happening, do not be afraid to pull the alarm, because that's the difference between somebody recovering and someone not recovering.
Yeah.
And then, for the checks, it's like that be fast list is a really good balance.
Yeah.
Eyes, face, arms, speech, get some help. That's the things to look for.
I mean, the tough one is if you are all alone and know something's wrong, and what do you do? I mean, as you know, my mother, who is now 93, had a stroke almost 4 years ago in February of 2019, and she blacked out. Luckily, didn't hit her head somewhere that took her out for good, like what happened, unfortunately, with D.H. Peligro just recently. But, and she doesn't know how long she was out. Was it 48 minutes or 48 hours? She has no idea how long she was out. And the only reason she came to, or the reason she came to, was finally the cat, little Tishlywinks, began licking her face. And she's not a cat to lick faces, or nuzzle you like that. But she knew something was wrong and licked Mom and licked her and licked her and licked her until she came to, and then slowly realized something was really wrong. And maybe she even realized, oh my God, I may have had a stroke, because she couldn't stand up all the way or anything. And somehow she got herself to the front door and got either in the doorway or right outside, and eventually flagged somebody walking by on the sidewalk, a couple, and they called 911 immediately and stayed with her. And yes, it was a stroke. And of course, with ambulances, the reason they drive so fast with the sirens on before they reach their the afflicted person, is because the most important thing with ambulances is not how quickly they deliver you to the hospital, but how quickly they get there in the first place, to try and figure out what's wrong and supply first aid that may be too late if they cruise along and stop at all the red lights taking you back to the hospital. That's the critical time, is right there. And again, they were trying to see what exactly was going on with her head. I think she might have given him her name. I don't know. Who's the president of the United States? And she responds, Trump, boo, hiss. They got a kick out of that. Then they tried, okay, wiggle your left leg. Let's see how much strength you have. And she kicked the guy in the back of the ambulance and insists that if the door hadn't been properly latched, he would have gone out the back door. And in her case, they told my aunt to expect, wheelchair, nursing home. She's never going to go home. And then they finally measured her actual physical strength, and she was in the 90s percentile wise for male or female for somebody 89 years old going on 90. And so they decided to try and get her back instead. And in her case, short-term memory issues, and she feels cold still on her left side and always will, although she goes for walks and, is supposed to use a cane but rarely does. And, all that mountain climbing, walking so far back and forth to work, and growing up a swimmer on Lake Michigan, all paid off in the end, or we would have lost her. And she would be barely there in a nursing home instead of, also she's really tenacious. She's like a much older version of Elizabeth Warren, basically, right down to the hair. And so she was very tenacious about rehab, and I'm going to get this back. I'll show them. I'm a tough old bird. And she is. So, some of this sounds very, very similar to her. And I haven't talked to her in detail about all the things that went on in her head or trying to get words out. And she fully saw the same thing you did about knowing what you wanted to say in your head and either can't find the word or can't get the word out of your mouth.
Yeah. It's a very bizarre experience to have. I still am not used to it. It just feels so... It's hard to explain. I guess the best thing I could say what it feels like is, those times you can't think of a word, or the days you feel when you just wake up. You're just like, where am I? What's going on? What is somebody saying to me? So it's nothing foreign. It's not things that people can't understand or that people don't experience on their own. It's just that everything I struggled with like that is now so much more of a struggle. And but really? I mean, yeah, it's like, I wasn't the best. I didn't have the best grammar. Now I'm really bad. It's like
what you're saying.
Yeah, so it's like certain things just aren't quite right. But it is a really interesting experience to be brain damaged. I mean, that's kind of a weird thing. The neurologist was like, well, you're obviously quite a guy, so, 90% of you is still a lot of you. And I'm like, yeah, I guess.
Do you feel you're only 90%, or do you feel like you're higher now?
I definitely feel affected by it. But I am grateful for everything that I have. It definitely makes you feel, I can't imagine somebody who's not feeling just gratitude to exist, to be able to be me. And every time I'm able to be, every time I think of it, I'm very glad to be. But, there's been certain things too with the heart stuff that I've had, and like little palpitations as the heart heals. They closed the PFO. They ended up finding that there was.
Right. We better rewind and explain that to people real quick too. After his second one with Nardwuar too, they found a congenital hole in his heart. And in his case, they said, well, this may never cause another stroke or ever trouble you again, so we can leave it alone unless you want to go ahead and have it surgically repaired. And his immediate reply was, fix it now, basically. And I think it's the same procedure you had.
Yeah, I guess I should say what ended up being the cause of this whole thing. It was determined that I have something that 20% of people have, which is a hole in my heart. You get that hole when you're a fetus in your mother's womb. It's part of how her blood goes from her body into yours before your heart is pumping your own blood, or you've developed completely your own blood. But as you're born and you grow up, that hole closes. Mine did not, and 20% of people doesn't. By itself,
what was the size of the hole?
I never did get a quite measurement, but it's pretty small. It's real tiny. It's like just a couple of millimeters, but it's enough for blood clots that go through my bloodstream and out to my lungs to be crushed by my lungs, which is what everybody is supposed to do. It's enough for that one to get through. So it was only a matter of time. And then added to that, I have one instance of factor V Leiden, which is a mutation that basically I clot at a higher rate than most people. And growing up, I've never been a bleeder. And looking back, that I realized that, like, I bleed, but like it tends to heal pretty quick, scab over. It's like I stopped bleeding pretty fast. It's always been easy to stop me from bleeding. Now, if I had a double instance of it, then I would seriously have a problem. But as one factor, V Leiden, that's not so bad either. It's you're functional. You just clot at a higher rate. Together, this led to my clot. Eventually a clot came by my heart, went up the hole, and shot right into my brain and clogged it. And they say it could have happened at any point in my life, but it happened now. But luckily, like I said, that's how it happened. So I did just about a month ago have a procedure to close the hole in the heart. So everything should be good.
What's the name of the procedure?
It was a PFO. PFO closure.
Okay.
That's what they call it.
And for those people who don't know, oh my God, heart surgery, and they think of open heart surgery.
Yeah, it wasn't an open heart.
Cracking your ribs like an egg and ripping in there and cutting stuff open. And that's not what was done here.
No, they go through your groin. They go through your thigh right by your groin, which is that is weird from another perspective. But yes, they actually go through your veins all the way up, and they insert into your heart and then open up the closure, pull it down, it clamps down, and it closes it up. They can do it while you're awake.
They suture it closed, or they put in some kind of a stent or something.
It's like an umbrella stent. It kind of covers up over this opening. And they can do it while you're awake, but with me, something went out. They can do it while you're awake, but with me, they had to put it down my throat as well to. They put a transesophageal. See, now I'm struggling with words. I'm struggling with what it's called, and I can't get the word. But anyway, they put a sonogram kind of thing like behind my heart so they could see what they were doing. So since they jokingly had me going down both ends, they thankfully put me under, and I was out.
Right. Do you have any idea the diameter of these thingies going around in there? Because this was kind of done robotically.
No, it was done. Well, it was done by a surgeon who controlled the arm. But yeah, it was small enough to go through my vein. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah,
it's weird to think about.
Yeah, for the record, real quick, so we don't get melodrama on the internet. Yes, I had minor heart surgery too over atrial fibrillation, AFib, which means the heartbeat is irregular. And thankfully, I was not in danger of my heart stopping, so no pacemaker, but going real, real fast. Oh, yeah. And the heart surgeon said, oh, yeah, you do. It was especially crazy when you were working out on your Nordic track or whatever and do the other stuff. And I'm like, yeah, well, Guantanamo School of Medicine shows, hour and a half of Nordic track with catching my breath now and again. What should I do with that? Well, you could do it, but it might not be a good idea. In other words, I didn't want to wind up like Jackie Wilson, the great soul singer performer who had a heart attack and a stroke at the same time on stage in New Jersey and spent the last several years of his life comatose before he finally died. Something like that can ruin your whole evening. So, there was two little things up through my crotch, and almost like not that much bigger than needles, actually, but there was enough in there they could see what they were doing. They could move it around. They basically cauterized or closed up the veins that were getting in there, causing the problems. And I haven't had any irregular heartbeats since, and even was able to quit all the drugs that were designed to control the rhythm of the heart and things.
That's
so, again, it was not getting cut open. I was not in danger unless I was stupid about it and didn't do anything. And then you never know. And
sometimes that's the hardest thing, is to admit you need help.
And now they looked and found plaque in me too, in the arteries, and the big bunch right outside my heart. Some artery, I left something or other nicknamed the Widowmaker by doctors, because so many people die right then and there if that thing closes up. And so sometimes they'll go in and put in a stent that pushes the whole thing to one side. They don't want us to try and cut it out, because if any of that plaque gets loose, then it's stroke time. So they just keep it there and leave it there and stuff. But then you got to go on this other drug for the rest of your life if you have that procedure. And so finally, after resisting all of the Lipitor, which I've had, had personal stories of people having cognitive dysfunction, thinking they had Alzheimer's after they took that shit and stuff. So yeah, I grudgingly said, okay, drug dealer, give me the damn drug instead, and wound up doing Crestor to avoid having the procedure where I'd wind up on something that terrifies me too, called Plavix, with no option to get off of it, get the cholesterol down in the least brutal way, is the idea.
Good. Well,
and that's as far as it's gone with that. And it's maintenance and it's preventive, and, so this and other things going on, I may or may not get back to doing the kind of live shows I like to do. I don't know yet. But so touring is a ways off, and I still got COVID paranoia, COVID potato syndrome. So I'm not DJing or doing anything like that. But we shall see. But, I'm not going to do anything that's going to it's not worth risking killing myself or really badly injuring myself in a stroke that I don't come through as well as you did, just to go on tour.
Right.
It's not worth it.
Well, I mean, hopefully you get back to a point where you can do the things you want to do.
Of course. On that point, I think we're going to have to wait for another time. You see, we can quickly say you have one podcast that's kind of been mothballed, but you're bringing back, that's all about horror, called Monster Candy.
I sometimes am. I started a podcast called Monster Candy with a bunch of friends, and it talks about horror movies. I'm not on it anymore. I'm kind of a guest host now. They kind of have gone on. Oubliette's on it though. That's really cool. So I recommend it. It's super fun. But I'm bringing back the one that I mothballed. That I'm bringing back is a podcast called 3 Gigs, where I sit down with different performers and I ask them the story of their first ever performance, their best performance, and their worst performance. And it ends up being a lot of really great discussions about it. And I really like the show. So I'm excited to have it come back.
I'm going to have trouble with that one. You want me on, but the best of all the performances, there's several contenders from several different kinds of performances. Same for worst performance, too.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing.
Things went wrong that were totally my own fault.
I tend to tell people that what I'm looking for is, you tell the story of the first time you ever performed, but then what was the moment you were like, this is everything I wanted this to be. This is why I do it. And then the show that makes you go, why am I doing this? What have I done? I want to go home. We all have.
Oh, yeah.
It's called 3 Gigs, and there's a bunch of them already up from before. I have a ton of them. They're They're going to be a bunch of new ones, and it's a really great show, so everyone should take a listen. Maybe one of these days I'll get Jello on it.
Right. Well, I think we are running out of time here and must wrap it up for Renegade Roundtable. So at least you'll hear me and maybe at some point even see me somewhere down near the River Styx.
Well, I thank you so much for having me on. It has been great hanging out, and it's been great chatting with you about everything. So thanks.
Adios, amigos.